Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. We bring you subject matter experts from around the world and share the latest and greatest evidence-based practices and interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. This podcast avoids stereotypes and biases in favor of the lived experiences of those we can best learn from. Now, please welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello, and welcome to episode 174 of The Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. This week, we have an exceptionally special guest with us who is at the forefront of transforming how we approach rehabilitation and support for justice-impacted individuals. The marriage of science, theory, and compassion has never been more essential than in today's criminal justice landscape. And our guest today, Nicole Kimberley-Staeheli, is emblematic of that union. She is not only an esteemed expert on trauma-informed care, but as you are about to hear, is my collaborator on our groundbreaking TIDES model. Now, TIDES doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It is an innovative and synergetic blend of desistance theory and trauma-informed care, and it stands strong on the tried and tested R&R framework. Now, this model is not just about understanding and addressing trauma, but also about understanding the journey of reintegration, change, and redemption. Now, listeners, if there was ever a time to grab your notebook and or hit that repeat button as you listen, this is that episode. Because what Nicole and I are about to share could fundamentally shift the way we think about justice, rehabilitation, and human potential. Please enjoy my conversation with Nicole Kimberley-Staeheli, and I will see you all on the other side. Well, welcome back to the show, Nicole. You've been on several times before, but for those in our audience who might not be familiar with your extensive background, could you share a brief overview of your journey in the field of trauma-informed care?
Absolutely. And thank you for having me back. It is so good to be here. So I have about a little over 25 years of experience in the criminal justice field. I started really focusing on trauma-informed care in about 2006. So for, doing math in my head, 16, 17 years now, I have been facilitating trauma-informed programming directly with justice-impacted and marginalized individuals. I've also done a lot of work training and consulting with professionals that are helping to support those individuals. So I've had an opportunity to work in trauma-informed care from kind of both of those perspectives.
And was there something behind your motivation in regards to trauma-informed care that you saw perhaps some unique intersection with the broader criminal justice system? We hear a lot out there in human service professional world about trauma-informed care, but what drew you there, particularly as it, as I said, intersects with justice-involved populations?
Love that you're asking, because it really grew from seeing a need with the clients that I was working with. So in about 2004, 2005, I was coordinating a women's unit at a correctional facility. So the women's unit was brand new. First time this facility had ever housed women. So they hired me and a teacher, and it was basically the two of us working with about 25 to 30 women in our facility. Our early focus, and this is what the research was really saying to do, back 15, 16 years ago, was education, employment, resources, right? So that was our goal. We had a great teacher. We had an employment specialist. A big part of my job in coordinating that unit and being their case manager was lining up resources, doing all of that work. And here's what we saw, though. We would do all of this work with the women. They were engaged. They were excited. We'd have kind of a perfect plan in place for when they left the facility. But what would happen 3, 4, 5 months down the road is they would come back. And they would come back in this space often of shame and in the space of, I screwed up. Everything was in place and I couldn't do it and I don't know why. And the more I saw that pattern, the more I started to question the work that we were doing. Not that it wasn't good work, but it clearly wasn't enough, right? Because I kept coming back. So I got permission to start doing some research. We were going to expand our women's unit. And I was like, all right, something isn't working. So I was basically told by my administrators to figure out what's not working. So did some research, talked to a lot of folks in the field, and came across this concept of trauma-informed care. And again, we're talking 2005, 2006. Trauma-informed care was not something we were talking about in relation to justice-involved individuals. I got some training, started to facilitate some programming, and the work, what I learned, not only changed how I interacted with the women, but it changed the services we offered. So now I'm seeing the women not from the perspectives of what is wrong with you, but what's happened to you, understanding how their past traumas and their current traumatic experiences were impacting their abilities to maintain employment, to manage and recognize their thoughts and emotions so they could be successful. All of these different pieces that we were trying to infuse, but we weren't addressing this underlying issue of the impacts of trauma. So getting that work or learning that work and having that experience changed my perspective on how I worked with my clients. It also changed my clients' perspectives on themselves. And that was invaluable. For a woman who had been in and out of the facility for years, who saw herself as a bad mother, as a criminal, as an addict, as a victim, to start to understand how her experiences have impacted her ability to cope with really challenging situations. And then we can start to talk about how you change, how you respond to those situations. That was a place of hope. That was a really transformation in how they saw themselves. And that made all the difference.
You stole one of my favorite quotes as of late, Nicole, when you noted, and I've been telling this to practitioners, we need to stop asking the question of what's wrong with you and start asking the question of what happened to you. Let's fast forward to the topic du jour, our TIDES model, which we're going to unpack during the remainder of this episode. And I'm sure I will toggle between interviewer and interviewee since this is really a co-production of ours. But why don't we shed some light on the TIDES model and specifically that interplay that we've discovered between trauma-informed care and desistance from crime, which led to sort of our conception of the TIDES model.
Well, you and I both have similar backgrounds, right? Very rooted in the R&R framework, Risk-Need-Responsivity. Lots of training from both of our perspectives on those core principles. I'm absolutely continue to be invested, especially in the cognitive behavioral work that we do. So I know we both see the value in that work. But I think we both had kind of similar journeys along different paths of also wanting to address some of the pieces that are missing from that framework. So for me, I took that route along that trauma-informed work, and I described some of my early work and kind of how it changed my perceptions. Went on to do that work, working not just with the women at the facility, but with men and boys and girls in a lot of different settings, and continued to see the change for both the clients and the professionals working with them that a trauma-informed perspective can have, right? Interestingly enough, to me, and when you and I talked, you took a similar journey, and correct me if I'm wrong, through the kind of road of desistance and seeing the difference that when you applied some of those desistance principles. And again, for both the professionals that you train and support and the clients that are working. And the fun thing is we saw so many common themes, right?
Yeah, I had the exact same experience as you did, but rather from my desistance lens. Again, we both started out foundationally and still believing in the risk-need-responsivity framework. But when I started looking at the desistance literature, which again looks at those pathways out of crime, and the more I talked to you and others about trauma-informed care, those same usual suspects kept popping up, which we're going to talk about here shortly when we talk about the 4 components of our TIDES model. But yeah, we kept talking and we sort of had a Reese's Pieces peanut butter moment here where the two great tastes that taste great together. There were so many common denominators that we thought we could leverage some synergy here and really do our clients a favor as well, because one of the things that you and I both agree in is that we need to approach our clients a lot more holistically and not in this almost fragmented approach we have now Whereas if you're the client, you may see your probation officer on Monday, you may see a chemical dependency counselor on Tuesday, you may deal with trauma on Wednesday. And again, we discovered that a lot of the same tools were at place here. So why not do a better job of seamlessly integrating these components together to help that individual both desist from crime and recover from trauma?
Well, and I think what's been fun for us is you and I are having conversations together that have really been happening separately, right? So when you said that word synergy, great word to describe what we kind of discovered together over, we've been having these conversations and doing the research together for over 3-4 years now. Does that sound about right?
And we finally came up with a deliverable here. Before we unveil the components, maybe just talk a little bit more for those who are more grounded in that R&R framework where yes, we talk about trauma, but historically that's been addressed merely as a responsivity consideration. But again, the more that each of us learned, I can't speak for you, but for example, I know when I learned all about ACEs, those adverse childhood experiences, I've come to think of them now almost as perhaps foundational to criminogenic needs. They just can't be ignored as simply a responsivity consideration. But again, Nicole, from your experience, how does understanding trauma play a pivotal role in redirecting folks away from criminal behavior?
That's a really big question. Maybe the best way to answer it is just to think about something unique in my background, back up just a tiny bit here, is that in addition to coordinating that women's unit and doing the work that I did, I went on to be the cognitive programming coordinator for a facility. And so I was facilitating cognitive programming literally day in and day out for years, hundreds, probably close to 1,000 or so groups, right? So I had all of this experience. I loved the group programming. But what I saw, a couple of things that I thought were missing from kind of our traditional R&R kind of cog-based approach when our focus on risk, right? So when you're running a typical cognitive behavioral program, we're focused on what? Antisocial thinking, antisocial feeling, antisocial beliefs, how it connects to behavior. Absolutely valid concern. But when you have a conversation with an individual and you sit them down in a room where they don't know others, where they are in a position of someone having power over them because they've been court ordered to attend a program or to be in a facility, and you start asking them about maybe some of the most difficult decisions they've ever made, when you start challenging some of their core beliefs, when you start to question, what were you thinking when you committed XYZ behavior? Well, you know what? Oftentimes you get a client that gets very defensive. They can get very agitated based on kind of a shame response to that. Because basically, what are we saying in the traditional way that we frame cognitive behavioral approaches? We're saying there's something wrong with your thinking. Because your thinking is leading you to do things that are getting you into trouble, and that you need to change that thinking. Well, for somebody who's experienced a lot of trauma, especially because we know the vast majority of people involved in the justice system have significant trauma histories, including adverse childhood experiences, like you mentioned earlier, right? You put someone with that background in that setting, and then we expect them to change. We expect them to accept and be open and be able to make significant changes in thinking and behavior that is truly not just antisocial, it's rooted in their ability to survive. So many of our clients, they have survived everything in their lives up to this point by acting and thinking and behaving in a certain way. We have to redefine that antisocial way of thinking and behaving into understanding how it's related to our clients' abilities to keep themselves safe and survive extensive trauma.
Yeah, that reminded me of another great quote I've been hearing as of late. Hurt people hurt.
Hurt people hurt others.
Yeah, and I think we sometimes forget that because, as I talk about on the show all the time, unfortunately, we get into too much of this sort of us, they binary, and we can't separate a horrible offense from the future possibilities of that individual, and or we don't do a deeper dive on really the root causes of those behaviors, up to and including just that simple understanding. Hurt people hurt others, as you said, and it's oftentimes a reaction, a trauma reaction, a survival mechanism.
Exactly. So I'm running all these cognitive behavioral groups, right? And I'm seeing these reactions over and over again. And I'm seeing the client struggle with some of these, what we think of as basic principles, right? Thoughts, feelings, control, behavior. And at the same time, having started to do all the research and work in the trauma-informed care piece of things that I was looking at, I began to think about, well, what is it about this work in COG that we're doing? Why is it creating barriers? Why isn't it more effective? Well, let's think about applying some of the trauma-informed principles to that work. Safety is foundational. So if we have clients who have experienced significant trauma, they're in a group where someone has power over them, they don't have relationships with you or each other, they're not going to have a safe experience. And what we know from how our brains work, literally, and I know we're going to dive into this, but safety is essential to access the prefrontal cortex, the executive functioning center of the brain, that, guess what, talks about how you think, what you're thinking, that allows you to notice and pay attention to your thoughts. We start to be able to access the amygdala when it talks about emotions and feelings. All of this executive functioning kind of work, all of this rational thinking that we want clients to do when they're doing the cognitive behavioral work can only happen if they have access to the prefrontal cortex, and back that up, they have to have a safe experience. You have to have a relationship with those clients. They need to have a safe experience within that group context and setting. So to your original question, I was getting back to the answer of that, of how trauma-informed care can help change behavior. That's the start. There's not a lot more layers to that, but to have a safe experience, to help clients feel connected and regulated is key to seeing more effective outcomes and a lot of more of that traditional R&R work that we do.
I like to stay positive and hope the field is going in a good direction. And sometimes I'll ask my guests to, look into their crystal ball, look into the future. And when you were talking, Nicole, I was saying to myself, boy, I wonder if in 100 years, probation officers, parole officers, corrections officials will look back and say, can you believe we had POs who had no idea what executive functioning was? Yet they thought they were doing such a great job running thinking for a change group or a decision points group or even engaging in one-on-one cognitive behavioral interventions with their clients. But if they're blinded to the brain science behind a lot of these things, it's really their efforts are so muted, and it's just so hard for them to get traction.
I never want to detract from the good work that we're already doing, because we're doing good work. But yeah, we can amplify that work. We can have better outcomes if we just understand a few more of these, as you said, kind of brain science kind of principles, which is really a foundation for a lot of the trauma-informed work. I think 10 years down the road, I don't even think we have to go 100. I think 10 years down the road, we are going to see more and more professionals working with justice-involved individuals getting this knowledge and understanding these connections. One of the most encouraging pieces of the work I do personally with Nicole Renee Consulting is that I do a lot of trauma-informed training for probation officers, for chemical dependency specialists, for reentry specialists. I think we're getting the word out, and people want to learn and understand more. And what I always tell a lot of the folks that I'm training is, again, you're already doing good work. Guess what happens in the brain? And I just want to have them have that extra layer of understanding of the impact of the work they're already doing. And then we can amplify that.
So speaking of which, and I'm glad you brought that up, because the TIDES model is not a replacement for the R&R framework. Indeed, it's actually, I almost consider it an adjunct, if you will, that agencies can really level up their R&R game if they apply some of these TIDES principles. Can you maybe give an illustration, Nicole, of how the TIDES model really just seamlessly integrates and, as I said, builds on that existing framework, what that might look like, or maybe even give an example that the practitioner might be able to put into place, just one sort of a nice takeaway, if you will?
Well, maybe we should start by kind of sharing what are the four kind of core principles of TIDES, right? What we've really taken from the work that we've both done over all of these years with trauma-informed care and desistance, and then maybe apply each of those, to that question that you just asked. Yeah, so the first key pillar, if you will, is self-regulation, right, is understanding a couple of pieces. So when someone is regulated, it refers to a couple of things, both in terms of the emotional and physiological regulation. So to be self-regulated, the stress levels in your brain need to be at an appropriate level where you're not hypervigilant, you're not anxious, you're not looking for a threat, but you basically are having a safe experience. So we want someone to be emotionally and physiologically regulated. When they're in that space, then again, access to the prefrontal cortex, what we talked about a little bit earlier, but then we can also start to examine that thinking. So self-regulation is about the emotional and physiological regulation. It's also then about their ability to reduce, I like to use the phrase reactive thinking, not antisocial thinking, but it's about being able to recognize when the thinking is really triggered by hypervigilance or a sense of threat or fear or discomfort, and to slow down some of those processes. So we talk about being self-regulated. We can talk about it in terms of creating relationships with clients. That's one way to help someone regulate. We can also talk about it in terms of sensory work, things like deep breathing, mindfulness, movement. These are things we don't typically talk about in corrections. Would you agree?
I would agree, Nicole. In fact, it's a good reminder that the TIDES approach is really more about perhaps recalibrating our current approaches to our justice-involved individuals and perhaps increasing the efficacy of those interventions by, among other things, simply increasing or reevaluating our perceptions of those that we supervise. It reminded me of a conversation I had just recently with Tim Chapman, where I was sort of asking him in his former role as a probation officer if he could go back and tell his past self something about what he's learned, sort of the if I knew then what I knew now kind of thing. And he talked specifically about the cognitive model under the R&R umbrella, and we've referred to this as well. His biggest misstep was, and he was told this by a client, Tim, you basically don't understand the context of where I'm coming from. Or as Tim put it, you don't live on my street. So it was sort of these tools work, but without the full contextual understanding of my perspective and my journey and what I've gone through, the application of these tools can be a little clunky, for lack of a better term. Which again is why I think we really are onto something with the pillars here, because we're not just addressing that self-regulation, we're weaving it in with the other components around identity, resilience, and social support to get a more holistic snapshot of what it takes to really help that person on their journey of recovery.
I really think that's the beauty of TIDES, is that what we've done is really looking at those contextual factors that we haven't always talked about, just like you were saying. It's also based on the neuroscience. I mean, how our brains work, how our brains literally function. And it's not just our clients, it's all of us. We need to be regulated to be able to access certain parts of our brains, to be able to recognize what we're thinking and feeling. We need to have a sense of who we are, to motivate us, to bring meaning to changing those behaviors, and then in terms of resilience and social supports to reinforce the change that we're trying to make. So really the four, your favorite word for the components or pillars of TIDES, the synergy of the four is really reflected. And we've seen it not just in the research, but in the practical experiences, the day-to-day work that we've done, I think we've got almost 50 years total combined, if not more, in terms of working with these clients. So.
And I also am always a big proponent of really believing in what you're selling or practicing what you preach. And maybe there's some practitioners can relate to this, but if you've ever tried some of these skills that we have practiced, say, for example, in our one-on-one cognitive interventions or in our group work, which is anchored in the CBI model, it can be hard to put these tools into place. And I think sometimes that's lost in translation, where we're telling folks who have walked a different pathway than us, aka high-risk clients, to simply, I'm in air quotes here, simply use these tools, these cognitive behavioral tools, and magically their behaviors are going to change. Because again, or as Tim put it, Joe, you don't live on my street. And it's a little bit more difficult when we contextualize that.
And I think the beauty of the work that we're talking about is that we are teaching clients skills when they're meeting with us in those experiences where maybe they do feel a little bit safer, where they're able to have some practice and working through and experiences of feeling safer, of being regulated. And what does that look like and feel like? For many of our clients, they live in a state of dysregulation. They live in a state of hypervigilance, again, because of their past trauma experiences that we've been talking about. So they need to first be able to be mindful of their own internal experiences and then to have the skills to manage those in a different way.
We talked about our sort of utopian dream of what it might look like in the future for probation officers to routinely talk about executive functioning. What if we also got them routinely talking about a client's dysregulation? Great job, Nicole, of sort of walking us through that first pillar, self-regulation. Let's take a look at the other three pillars of the TIDES model. Those being, of course, identity, resiliency, and social support. Let's kick it off talking about that second pillar, that of identity.
And I love our conversations about identity in terms of desistance and trauma-informed care, because trauma absolutely overwhelms our sense of self, right? It changes how we see the world. It changes how we see ourselves. It changes our perceptions of our connections with other people. It's an overwhelming experience. So for many of our clients who are already struggling with that impact of their identity, now we've placed them in a system that labels them, that defines their sense of self by often one of the worst things they've ever done, maybe on one of the worst experiences they've ever had. And so now you're in this space of, who am I? And if I am an abuser, if I am this drunk, if I am this thief, this addict, whatever the label that has been placed on them, if that's who I am, well, where's the motivation for change? Where's the belief that I'm able to change? Where's the hope in that perception of ourselves?
And this may have been one of the first inklings when you and I were talking years ago about these connections between trauma-informed care and desistance. And you just said it. Where's the hope? Where's the self-efficacy? And this dovetails 100% with the desistance literature.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when clients start to explore, and I don't want to think about it nor present it as positive, negative self, good or bad, old or new. It's not about that. It's about, who is your authentic self? How can you be the person you most want to be? That person, the sense of, trying to think of words for it. It's hard to describe, but just the fullest sense of who you are as an individual.
Yeah, I know where you're going, Nicole. And that's another example of, and we've talked about the difference in TIDES from the strict embrace of the R&R model, which sometimes one of my critiques is it is simply too binary between asking practitioners to define variables in someone's lives as risk or no risk, risk or no risk. Whereas when you look at identity as a journey or a trajectory, if you will, to your point, we're not saying that was your old bad self. It's almost more of a redemption of, I wouldn't be the person I am today without those struggles in the past. It's not asking someone to negate their past, but rather accept it and even embrace it and say, I came through that a better person and now I can give back. And it starts to tie into all the research around generativity with desistance, but it's more of, as Shad Maruna would say, this wounded warrior mentality. I'm a survivor and I came out of this and sort of rose like a phoenix versus, oh, that was my bad self. Ignore it, deny it, be ashamed of it. That wasn't the real me. As you said, Nicole, no, that was the authentic me, sort of a warts and all approach, but I'm stronger for it.
I love what you were just saying there. And in the trauma-informed literature, we talk a lot about reconciliation or bringing meaning to those experiences, right? It's not about letting go. It's not about forgetting. It's about being able to reconcile all of your life's experiences. And then what are your next steps? How do you want to move forward? And what is that going to look like for you today?
Yes. And when folks partner with us and learn more about this, we're going to go down the rabbit hole of restorative justice, because that ties in here as well, and sort of that healing aspect and helping individuals, both the victim and the perpetrator, fill in those stories and complete that story and reconcile that story.
That renewed sense of self is another way I like of describing it. And that becomes motivation for change. When we've talked about cognitive behavioral interventions and kind of more of a more traditional way of looking at those interventions. Well, we've always looked at the motivation to change the behavior, and kind of separated from the sense of self. With TIDES, what we want to do is still use those cognitive behavioral interventions. We're still doing that work. But what if the motivation, what if the source of change is a renewed sense of how I see myself? A great example that I love to share is a client I worked with a lot in relation to a domestic violence program that I was running. And he talked about, I've been this kind of, in his words, piece of shit dad who was hurting my kid's mom, and that wasn't okay. He gotten to that point, right, where he was really holding himself accountable for those behaviors and experiencing a lot of shame and remorse. But here's the thing. I didn't want him to keep seeing himself from that sense. So when I started to talk about, what parts of yourself do you want to embrace now? Who do you want to be now? Well, his phrase, what he came up with is, I want to be the dad that goes to my kids' baseball games. Because that dad is sober, and that dad has a positive relationship with his kid. That dad doesn't have a no contact order. He's allowed to see his kid and to be present at those games. Well, okay, so if that is his renewed sense of self and his self-perception, well, then what are the tools? What are the skills? What are the behaviors that we need to support to help you grow into that perception, to be that dad? It's a different, doing the same work, but a very different, much more of a forward-focused way of looking at it versus changing those past behaviors.
Yep, exactly. Let's talk about resilience, our third pillar. A lot of folks heard that term. I love your definition of resiliency, Nicole. So why don't you begin with that?
Well, what I don't like to do is limit it to this idea of bouncing back, because that's what we first tend to think of, right? That's it's the ability to bounce back. And some people are just more resilient than others. Well, no, resilience isn't about how strong you are. It's not about how smart you are. It is about some internal characteristics and skills. So it's kind of about our internal resources. It's also about, external resources, relationships with others. So there were really two components when we look at that. And depending on your life experiences, and we've talked a lot about the life experiences of our clients, we don't necessarily live on their street. I love Tim's way of describing that. But we do know is that many of our clients haven't had the opportunities to have positive, supportive relationships. They haven't had the opportunities to develop internal resources or skills, coping skills, abilities to, be forward-focused and thinking about long-term consequences. Those are skills that can help build resilience that a lot of our clients don't have. So we have to look at in that twofold piece of developing internal coping skills, developing the external resources that are going to support resilience.
This is another great example. We've talked about the synergy between these and how there's sort of a bigger bang for your buck when you combine them. But just now, Nicole, when you mentioned coping skills, reminded me, this is right out of the cognitive literature. It's out of the desistance literature, and you'll learn all about resiliency in the trauma literature. So it's one of these major common denominators where we thought, okay, this needs to be a focal point or one of our pillars because it is related to so many of these other established core correctional skills.
But it's not a perspective that we talk about a lot. I shouldn't say that. We talk a lot about we need to be resilient. What we don't talk about is how do we develop resilience? How do we support clients to be more resilient? Because then, again, it isn't just some people are just more resilient than others. And that's almost kind of a defeatist way of looking at it.
Yeah, that's a great point. We could probably quiz 100 probation officers, 100 human service professionals, what we mean by that. And we would get answers not always right on the bullseye as far as what you've been describing, sort of that, that grit, that determination, those internal characteristics up to and including coping skills that can help us get to the goals we're really trying to get at with TIDES. Let's bring it home, Nicole, with that fourth pillar, social support. Here's another one that it dovetails into all the other pillars, but I'll let you kick it off.
Well, for me, at least, when we started talking about these ideas and landed on the importance of social support, again, trauma-informed literature will say trauma alienates you. It inhibits your ability to connect with others. It's an isolating experience, right? So again, many of our clients do not have even really the ability to connect. Because to connect, if you think about it, you need to know yourself, right? You need to be able to cope and manage your own internal experiences. So that sense of identity, to then be able to be in a space where you're authentically connecting with others. Connection is a vulnerable experience. For many clients who've experienced a lot of trauma, it is not safe to feel vulnerable. I'm not going to be authentic with you because if I'm vulnerable with you, I put myself at risk, and that's not a safe experience for me. So that need for connection, also what we know is that connecting with others is part of healing. And so it's essential. So again, it is about building the skills, understanding the challenges and barriers for so many of our clients to have authentic connection, and then creating safe experiences and building the skills. And it's about those emotional regulation, those self-regulation skills we talked about. It's about understanding a sense of who I am so that I am able to authentically connect and open myself up to those healing relationships. So that's kind of my take on it. I love the desistance emphasis in a couple of different ways too. So
when we think of those desistance 101 definitions, we think of desistance in those broad terms of human capital, social capital, and identity transformation. Well, here we are with social support. It is a variable in building resiliency. It is a variable in building self-regulation. It is a variable in evolving one's identity. And just taking a step back, whether it's the R&R model or really any psychosocial population or treatment rather you're dealing with, the biggest moderator is historically social support, whether you're treating phobias, addiction, paranoia, criminality, trauma. People with good social support do better, and those who don't.
And I think too, it's important that we really easily fall into the language of kind of pro-social, anti-social, right? Of labeling those social supports or those peer relationships. And that's not our emphasis. Really what we want to focus on is just what we both really, I think, been saying about the importance of connection in healing, in moving forward from any challenge, really. And you just listed a bunch. And then also to recognize that it really is about that individual's experience of that relationship. You've said it earlier, I think, if not today, certainly in our conversations, that sometimes the best supports for our clients are those who have shared those same experiences, who live on the same street, again, to use Tim's phrase. And historically, I think we'd be leery, we'd be worried. Well, that person maybe isn't a pro-social person for you. I think we need to take a step back from that and really look at how do they experience those relationships. And if those supports are affirming that renewed sense of self, the change that our clients are making, that's the support that they need. A community that's going to recognize and come alongside this renewed sense of this individual, not define them by what they've done in the past.
Yes, Nicole, one of my mild critiques of the Risk-Need-Responsivity model would be it is a little bit too binary as far as we train up and we coach up practitioners to define variables in our clients' lives as falling on one side of a fence, if you will, risk or no risk, risk or no risk. And when we do that with companions and friends and associates, I think it's too short-sighted because we're using those broader definitions of risk and no risk and precluding a lot of individuals who may be able to help in that journey and share a perspective, again, of living on that street that's actually going to boost somebody out of criminality and towards desistance or help them in their healing from trauma. But it doesn't necessarily check all the right boxes under risk or no risk as a companion in the R&R world. So I've been referencing the Risk-Need-Responsivity framework, which we know is sort of the gold standard of correctional agencies. Let's maybe talk a little bit about how that integration with R&R and the TIDES model might look.
I think what the beauty of TIDES, I keep saying that, I don't know, the phrase is coming to mind, but because I do think it's seamless. I do think we do a couple of things. We want to augment the really great work that agencies and individuals are already doing. We want to add to, right? So some of those pieces about self-regulation, talking about emotional management as a skill versus our kind of focus on more of restructuring some of that antisocial thinking, right? So we're going to add some skills. We're going to add some tools to things that agencies are already doing and already doing really well. we're going to maybe shift some perspective. So augmenting that work is a big piece of it. I also think then reframing some of how we see clients. Trauma-informed work, TIDES, is much about, again, the work we do with clients, but also about the work, our perceptions of the work that we do as professionals. So it's a parallel process. So in terms of reframing, a good example of that is, are these antisocial behaviors, the phrase we like to use, or do we really see these behaviors as survival behaviors? That our clients have learned to survive the life experiences they have had in certain ways, and that's impacted how they think, how they feel, how they interact with others. That has literally changed the architecture of their brains and the connections in their brains. So we want to give agencies and individuals some maybe new perspectives or a different way of viewing some of the work that we do and some of the behaviors that we see.
Could not agree more. And I can't stress enough that, yes, as you just articulated, TIDES is not in conflict with the risk-needs-responsivity model. It's really more about leveling up or even maybe recalibrating some of those approaches to incorporate some of our insights of where we see process improvement. And you've talked about self-regulation, identity, resiliency. I would venture that a lot of the existing capacity for agencies operating under the risk-needs-responsivity model are really well equipped to tackle those. I mean, we could look at those existing abilities and say, okay, just modify it a little bit more and you're really going to build this person's resiliency. Or start to incorporate identity into some of your goal setting. Or again, these other established tools that are already in place.
No, I love that. I do a lot of training, as you know, through my personal consulting firm on trauma informed and being trauma responsive, what that looks like, right? And one of the exercises that we do that I think really maybe kind of what gives an image of what we're talking about here is to think of a client who's had a very over-the-top reaction, a reaction that you're just like, what in the world? What is going on here? Why is this happening? Then try to consider and then think about that behavior. What are you seeing? You know, is a client yelling and screaming at you? Did the client lose it and storm out of your office? You know, whatever that looked like. Then try to think about what could be the trauma reminder. What could have been going on to dysregulate that client? What could they be experiencing that isn't just about this adverse behavior you're seeing, but that maybe triggered an emotional reaction? And then think about what were they trying to survive? How were they trying to keep themselves safe? Well, if they yelled and screamed at you, maybe they're in a fight reaction kind of a mode where they have learned that when I feel threatened, when I don't feel comfortable in a situation, I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to fight before you hurt me. It changes our perceptions of the work that we do. It changes our perceptions on how we see our clients. It doesn't justify the behaviors we see. But if we are looking at that through that kind of curious perspective of what's going on here, what's happened to this client versus, again, what's wrong with them in this moment, that can then inform our behaviors or what we do in response.
In evidence-based practice training world, we tend to use a lot of our go-to imagery, but you and I have both seen use of the iceberg, if you will, and we're encouraging folks, you need to stop looking at the behaviors above the water and get down to the bottom of that iceberg. And contextually, how we've trained this in the COG world has been, that's where you're going to get those deep-rooted attitudes and beliefs, which you have to change those behaviors. And what I heard you just say was, we can still take that same approach, but start exploring those behaviors as a survival response and find out what's at the bottom of the iceberg in that regard. So it's really about broadening your lens and really applying more due diligence when it comes to root cause analysis of these so-called criminal behaviors or antisocial behaviors, but reframing them as a survival response, a trauma reaction, and not just a result of too many criminogenic needs coming to the surface.
And that's recognizing the neuroscience. That's recognizing how our brains work. Because our brain's first priority is always to help us survive. And if our clients are perceiving a threat to their survival, and again, it maybe isn't evident to you or I or even to the client, they're going to react. And they're going to react in a way to try to keep themselves safe. And so for many of our clients, that is how they live their lives. What we want to do is slow down that process. And then once we've slowed down that process, once we've helped them regulate, we can start to infuse, how do you see yourself? We can start to build those components. And then we can start to talk about how are we going to help you build your resilience so you're coping better, so you're not just constantly reacting, but that you're living and thriving. To me, that's really at the heart of what TIDES is about. What gets me so excited about the work you and I have been doing over these last few years. And just the thrill of being able to share that and start to talk about what this can really do for the clients we work with and for the professionals that serve
And
them.
thank you for reminding me of the neuroscience tie-ins. I know we didn't really highlight that aspect of the TIDES model, but trust me, dear listeners, it's there. We've looked at sort of the brain's hardwiring and done a lot of research on this. If any of you are regular listeners of the show, I'm sure you've heard Dr. Jared Brown be on the show talking about neurocriminology-informed professionals. And yes, we have infused the brain science into everything, which we really think helps add efficacy to the model. It is physiological as well.
Well, it's why it works, to put it really simply. It's why these components, especially when we bring them together in an intentional way, the way we have with TIDES, it's why it will make a difference. So it's why it does make a difference when we work with clients using these.
And again, I know you would agree with me that as I sign off every day, there's no them, there's only us. It works because we're all humans and we all have the same brain. And the spirit of what we're doing here, we're not looking at those people or those criminals. We're all hardwired the same. So there's the parallel process, which we always talk about on this show. This would work for a trauma survivor, a quote unquote high risk client. Would work for you and I, Nicole. It would work for your neighbors who maybe have struggles in relationships or trauma survivors or what have you. But yes, because we anchored this in the brain's hardwiring, as you said, it works.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm just excited to start to share and talk more about that with anyone who might be interested. We can do that in a lot of different ways. I know I'm sharing a lot on LinkedIn in terms of sharing kind of teasers, if you will, this is what this is going to be about. This is what we're talking about. We are really at that stage now where we would love to partner or work with some agencies who are intrigued, who want to learn more about TIDES. We look at TIDES in terms of training, of sharing information, but not just training. It's really about supporting your agencies from a long-term perspective. So we're going to talk about concepts when we work with agencies. We're going to train. We're going to offer information. We're going to come alongside with you with practical skills and maybe some new things that you haven't been doing in terms of emotional regulation or identity, specific cognitive work that can help you build up those components in the work that you do with clients. And then, we'll come back. We'll be there to support. We'll be there to coach. And we just, really want to come alongside the agencies who are open to exploring the TIDES model with us.
Yes, exactly. And you noted we've been posting a lot on LinkedIn. I've been talking about TIDES on this podcast. I will be in New York City. Granted, the internet lasts forever, so depending on when you listen to this episode, but I will be at the American Probation and Parole Association's annual training institute in New York City the last week of August 2023. So if you are listening on the Saturday that this drops or the Sunday or Monday, I'll still be in New York until Wednesday. Come find me. We can have a nice informal conversation about how TIDES might be a great fit for your agency.
Well, have a fabulous time at APPA. I'll be there in spirit, if not in person, with you and with all of the wonderful professionals there and the great work that the APPA does. So I'm excited to hear from folks, and I know you'll post our emails, our LinkedIn connections, and we would just love to continue the conversation.
I would love to have it as well with our dear listeners. So yes, please reach out. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us and shedding some light on our innovative TIDES model, which we really feel is a game changer. And until we speak next time, let's keep doing the great work we're doing.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for having me. We'll talk soon.
All right. Talk soon, Nicole. Bye-bye. The Journey to Transformation, Embracing the TIDES Model with Alex and Maya. Once upon a time, In a town nestled between rolling hills and the embrace of a calm river, there lived a young man named Alex. He had faced his fair share of challenges, often finding himself on the wrong side of the law. However, his encounter with a dedicated probation officer named Maya marked the beginning of a transformational journey, a journey guided by the principles of the TIDES model. Pillar number 1, self-regulation, the calm within. As Maya began working with Alex, she recognized his struggles with impulsivity and emotional volatility. She introduced him to the concept of self-regulation, helping him identify the triggers that led to his impulsive actions. She shared techniques rooted in cognitive behavioral interventions that allowed Alex to pause, take a deep breath, and regain control when confronted with difficult emotions. Through this process, Alex learned that his brain had the capacity to adapt. Slowly but surely, he began to notice changes in his reactions. Instead of reacting immediately, he started to engage with his emotions, acknowledging them without being consumed by them. With Maya's guidance, he discovered the power of rewiring his thoughts and responses, a newfound ability that allowed him to navigate life's challenges with greater ease. Pillar number 2, identity, rediscovering the author within. As Alex gained mastery over self-regulation, Maya shifted the focus to exploration of identity. She believed that within each individual resides the potential to rewrite their story. Drawing inspiration from narratives of transformation, Maya guided Alex to uncover the aspects of himself he wanted to nurture. Through storytelling exercises, Alex began to craft a narrative that aligned with his aspirations. He realized that he could be the author of his own journey, reshaping his past mistakes into valuable lessons. This process of identity transformation gave him the confidence to make decisions that reflected his newfound sense of agency and purpose. He learned that his identity wasn't fixed. It was a story he could revise, adapt, and own. Pillar number 3, resilience, forging strength through challenges. Alex's journey encountered bumps along the way, trials that tested his determination. Maya reminded him that setbacks were not roadblocks, but opportunities for growth. Drawing from the resilience strategies embedded within the TIDES model, Maya encouraged Alex to embrace challenges as stepping stones towards goals. Maya shared stories of individuals who had overcome adversity, emphasizing that strength often emerges from the darkest moments. Alex found inspiration in these tales, recognizing that his journey was not defined by his past, but by his ability to bounce back and forge ahead. With each challenge, he developed a newfound resilience, a core strength that he hadn't known he had possessed. Pillar number 4, social support, building bridges to a brighter future. Throughout his journey, Alex realized the importance of connections. Maya introduced him to various support groups and community resources, emphasizing the significance of external resources. Alex learned that he didn't have to navigate life's challenges alone. There were people willing to stand by him. As Alex engaged with these support systems, he witnessed the impact of shared experiences. The bonds he formed with others who had walked similar paths gave him a sense of belonging and acceptance. The stories he heard from his fellow journeyers reaffirmed that transformation was not just an individual endeavor. It was a collective pursuit. With his growing network, Alex felt empowered to create a future filled with positive connections and shared growth. As Alex's journey continued, he realized that the TIDES model was not just a set of principles. It was a compass guiding him towards a brighter future. The pathways of self-regulation, identity, resilience, and social support had woven together, forming a tapestry of transformation. Through the nurturing guidance of Maya, Alex emerged as a hero in his own narrative, equipped with the tools to navigate life's challenges, rewrite his story, overcome setbacks, and foster meaningful connections. Ladies and gentlemen, as we wrap up this enriching episode of the Criminologist podcast, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on our enlightening conversation with Nicole Kimberley-Staeheli of Nicole Renee Consulting. This week, through our exploration of the TIDES model, a shared vision of Nicole and myself, we've shed light not only on addressing trauma, but on promoting desistance from crime. As an acronym for trauma-informed desistance, TIDES carries a dual mission: healing the scars of the past and forging a path towards a crime-free future. The 4 pillars we discussed: self-regulation, identity, resilience, and social support are not just theoretical concepts, but the foundation stones of creating lasting change. While we acknowledge the immense challenges trauma presents within the criminal justice system, it's equally vital to understand that TIDES also prioritizes a proactive approach, one that seeks to prevent reoccurrence and fosters an environment that supports individuals on their journey away from crime. To our esteemed colleagues in government agencies, nonprofits, substance abuse, mental health, all of our potential partners, TIDES isn't a mere theoretical construct. It represents a transformative lens through which we can understand, address, and ultimately diminish criminal behaviors. It's an invitation to envision a criminal justice system that heals, educates, and reintegrates. Podcasts, like The Criminologist, play a pivotal role in echoing these thoughts, in creating avenues for dialogue, and in generating momentum for change. As the Criminologist podcast evolves, our mission remains steadfast: to educate, inspire action, and share groundbreaking insights like TIDES. To our devoted listeners, your time, curiosity, and engagement are invaluable. If you find yourself intrigued by the potential of the TIDES model, or if you believe in its applicability in your realm, we warmly invite you to collaborate with us. Together, we can navigate the complexities of criminology and bring forth a new wave of informed, empathetic change. Thank you for being a part of this journey with us. Remember, in the vast world of criminology, the TIDES model is both our compass and our beacon, guiding us towards a brighter, more informed future. We will be back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, if you are seeking expertise, training, or presentations on core correctional skills, the topic of desistance from crime, or broader criminology insights, do not hesitate to reach out through our website, theparagongroup.llc.com. For those of you with burning questions, feedback, or comments about today's episode or any other, you can touch base with us directly through our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Engage with us through our socials. Give our Facebook and Instagram pages a follow at The Criminologist. We frequently update those feeds with exciting content, so you don't want to miss out on our latest visual insights. On Twitter, so are we. Find us at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. Hit that follow button for more updates. You may also follow me, Joseph Arvidsson, or Nicole Renee-Staeheli on LinkedIn. And for a deeper dive into the themes of this podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Engaging content awaits. And a fun update for listeners, if you are interested in merchandise, please reach out for information on securing your own Criminologist coffee mug, pen, or refrigerator magnets. Finally, if this podcast resonates with you, if you believe in our mission and vision, spread the word. Tell your colleagues, friends, or anyone you think would benefit. Ask them to subscribe, and do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
The Criminologist podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can find more content and videos on our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Both the Criminologist podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.